Hey everybody, when we have a business, we always worry about the ups and downs in the market, chasing customers and doing all sorts of crazy things. But did you know that the number one thing you need to consider in your business is how much cash you're working with? Having cash is everything. It opens up opportunities, gives you sleep during the night and everything that you would ever imagine for. So let's talk about cash on today's Profit with a Plan podcast. Hey entrepreneurs, are you trying to make bigger profits in your small business? If you're like most of us business owners, increasing your profitability is always on your mind, and you're probably looking for more ways to grow your revenue while growing your company. Well, you found a podcast that shares ideas to help you do just that. I'm Marcia Riner, known as the Profit Booster and a business growth strategist. I've helped tons of small business owners to establish and implement a tangible plan that guarantees increased profitability, guide your growth, and plans for your future exit. Because building a highly profitable and sale-ready business creates a win-win scenario. That's more money now and a windfall when it's time to let go. And I want to share strategies that I've learned with you on today's Profit with Plan podcast. But before we get started, I have something great to share with you, my podcast audience. If you ever wanted to supercharge your business, avoid profit plateaus, operational headaches, or growth roadblocks, I've got a brand new Profit Booster playbook just for you. You'll uncover 3 essential strategies and a quick way to take action on them. This is not just a single-page report. It's filled with impactful strategies, actionable steps, and expert guidance to elevate your profits. Go download this free playbook at boostingprofit.com. All right, my guest today is the king of cash. Peter Kingma is America's working capital leader for EY Parthenon. Why can't I speak today? EY Parthenon. Working across a variety of sectors, including automotive, aerospace, defense, healthcare, retail, and consumer products. He advises business leaders on how to optimize the cash management. His work has led to well over $25 billion of value created for his clients. Peter is a regular contributor to leading business publications and podcasts, and often speaking at industry events about his area of expertise. His clients bring him in to lead planning sections, consult with management teams, and present to their boards. Peter who has a degree in economics from Purdue University and lives in Chicago and Columbia, Missouri. You can learn more about Peter at peterkingma.com. Peter, if I can get my mouth to work today's going to be a great recording. I'm so happy to have you on. Welcome to Profit with a Plan.
Thank you, Marcia. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, first of all, congratulations on the book. I just love the name, Cash is King. And if that wasn't ever the most important statement for every business owner to think about, I don't know what is. So how did you come to the idea of writing a book?
Yeah, so it's, as you said in the intro, I've been working with companies for the past, 30 years on this topic, on the topic of improving working capital and cash flow and all things liquidity. And what I observed over those years is that we do a really good job of explaining revenue, and we do a really good job of explaining, cost containment or profitability. And in many organizations, and I work with, big organizations, but the same principles could be applied to small businesses. In many of these big organizations, most of the employees, most of the individuals understand their role that they play either in revenue generation or in cost containment, profitability. And almost none of them understand the role that they play in the generation of or the consumption of cash. And so that's what I'd love to explore with you in this conversation today, and that I've put in the book is, how do you get a better control over cash flow? Because, that is what makes or breaks a business. You can be profitable and still go bankrupt. You can have revenue and still have to pay taxes on it, even though the cash may not be in your pocket. So it's that vitally important concept of generating cash that excites me, and the reason that I wanted to write this book to help others.
I love it. And you know what? I have to say, even more importantly, to smaller micro businesses and those that are really thriving, cash is everything when it comes to it, because you may have a longer pay cycle to get your money out, but you still need to pay your employees. But having that cash gives you that, and I think you coined the phrase with the opportunities, right? That is so very important. Where I think the larger companies, even though that the cash is still important to them, they may have more opportunities or more flexibility. Where the smaller company, they're almost living paycheck to paycheck in that kind of mindset. And so that's why I wanted to bring you on and really talk about the advantages and opportunities that looking at your cash ability and managing that in the best way can really lift that company up farther and faster.
I love it. Let me, if I can, let
Yeah,
me tell you a silly little story
please.
from the very beginning when I got out of college, and then I'll kind of tie it together back to the where we were headed. And that is, so right out of college, I was living paycheck to paycheck. But fortunately, I knew when I was going to get paid. I got paid on the 1st and the 15th. And fortunately, my landlord didn't come knocking on the door demanding rent whenever he wanted. I had set dates where I knew when my car payment or my rent payment was coming due. Now, I say that the days leading up to those paydays were kind of lean. I refer to them as my tuna fish days because about all I could afford was canned tuna fish. I was eating like a common house cat. But we learn this concept in our household management of cash flow, right? We
Mhm.
understand the importance of having cash on hand to pay our bills and to meet our obligations. Somehow, when we get into business, we
Mm.
sort of lose some of those basic principles. And so we get very excited about chasing revenue, for example, and selling and recording how much revenue we've generated, but yet somebody may not have paid us yet, or
Right.
we may have had to agree to longer payment terms, um, and or we tie up too much of our cash into things like inventory that's not selling, and so we can't
Mm.
churn off the cash. And so it's not just about meeting sort of payroll and the obligations, but it's that liquidity that will enable you to grow your business and to take advantages. So you may have a competitor that's struggling, and you want to pounce, or you may want to enter into a new market or buy some new equipment. And if you don't have that capital, you can't do that. And the cash you generate from your business is always going to be the cheapest form of capital that you're going to have access to, far cheaper than going out and taking on debt.
Isn't that the
um,
truth?
yeah, yeah. So it's an exciting topic for sure.
No, I think it's really good. And you're right. So many businesses look at, oh, well, I made a sale. So the sale was X, and so now they're already spending that money on something else before realizing that that money hasn't even crossed over yet.
That's true. And so many times when we chase these sales, we we forget to bake in the costs associated with things like commercial terms, like how the payment terms,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe even service level agreements. If we're providing products or services. And so we get to the end of the negotiation on price, and then the customer comes back and demands 120-day payment terms or certain contractual agreements, and we're kind of stuck because we've kind of lost our negotiating power at that point. And
Mm.
so we have to agree to that. So in the book, I kind of explore lots of practical tactics to take to bake that sort of cost to serve, the total cost to serve of a customer into the equation so that you have full visibility of that. Because the idea is maybe those are really great business decisions. Maybe you would do them over again, but you want to do it in an informed way, and you want to place your bets on the customers and the deals that are going to turn out to have the greatest rates of return, and not get caught by surprise at the end after you've negotiated that you've now suddenly agreed to a bunch of commercial terms that are going to be difficult to live with.
Exactly. And I think that that's like you said, that it's different than the personal environment, right? Where you just know you've got these bills coming in and you're going to get your paycheck on this day. We have to shift our mind and saying, okay, what are the variables that come with the income that we have coming out? And just because, if you've got a 120-day, on your payment that you're receiving, your employees still need to be paid, your vendors still need to be paid, the rent on the building, the utilities, the products to make that has to be paid. So you have to think about, as you said, the dominoes and how they play down before you make that, the negotiation on it.
That's right. And, as a small businesses may not have a lot of bargaining power. And then we talk about that. I talk about how to assess, where you sit in sort of the polarity, if you will, of power.
The food
Uh,
chain.
yeah, where are you? Are you a guppy or are you a shark? But if you are a guppy, um, then then you need to make sure you control all the things that are within your control. Let's
Mm.
let's stick to billing and collections for just a minute. Too often I see that that becomes kind of an afterthought. Like we do five other things before we, get up and try and do all the clerical work to get bills out the door on time, on into the right place with the right, maybe purchase order reference requirements. And every day that you delay in that, or anything that any inaccuracy that you have, is going to just it's going to cause downstream problems, and it's going to cause delay in getting paid. There are deadbeats out there, but most companies do pay on time, or close to time for sure. And quite often the delay is not the customer's fault. The delay is our fault. And so as a small business owner, if you can't control the commercial terms, for sure be in control of all the things that are within your control, like getting bills out the door correctly into the right location.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that brings to mind, a typical challenge in the health environment, right? Is getting that insurance claim paid, right? They've treated the client already or the customer already, and now they've got to pay somebody to go chase that claim for them so they can get paid, and then they end up negotiating on it to get a partial, I mean, there's so many different avenues that are out of our control, that if we can control the ones, what three or four that we're allowed to control, that makes it a little bit better. But I think that the business owners forget about all the minutia on the outside, right? They see client, customer, revenue, paid, done, out. They forget even about the delivery of the service and the people they need to pay, and the products that they need to provide to produce the service or product that they're sending out, the cost of goods sold.
That's right. And you raise a great point, because I think too, when we live in a P&L dominated environment, um, we may make decisions that make sense from a P&L standpoint, but that don't make sense from a balance sheet standpoint. So for
Ooh, the
example,
the 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 ugly word, balance sheet, right?
yeah, I know no one wants to. Oh, I should say at the outset, this book is not a textbook. Fear not. There are not complicated formulas that you're going to have to memorize.
Thank
In
goodness.
fact, I wrote it as a fictional story, meaning it's a fictional company. Every chapter, they're trying to solve a problem, because I wanted to take some of these seemingly, boring and sometimes complicated concepts and present it in a way that my family would want to read, that small businesses would be able to access and read. But back to the point on procurement, sometimes what we'll do is we'll go and we'll chase a cheaper part, or a cheaper source of material, which makes great sense from the P&L standpoint. But maybe we agreed to a greater minimum order quantity, or
Mm,
a longer lead time. And that may not make sense, because we may be now tying up precious cash in inventory and in materials that's not turning very fast.
mm,
So it's getting to it's understanding that the third leg of the stool, between revenue and profitability, is cash flow. And you got to evaluate those decisions with that lens as well as the other two. If you're going to be able to grow your business and weather storms.
And and there's not one that is more important than the other. Yes, revenue is very important. Yes, profitability is very important. But yes, cash is incredibly important as well. And I think they're on that balance of the scale that they're all equally important.
They're all equally important. And one thing I talk about is every dollar that you invest in your business costs the same,
Mm.
but produces different rates of return.
Mm.
And so, when you are going to use your precious capital, that cash, you want to make sure you're using it intentionally. And so that's that, to your point of evaluating the three criteria, if I'm going to enter into a commercial agreement with a customer that is going to be, complicated and maybe tie up cash, I want to do that for my profitable customers, my customers where that makes sense. I want to intentionally do that. I don't necessarily want to apply that to everybody because not all customers are alike. One concept I talk about is, really calculating that total cost to serve. What I bet you'll find and what I see, time and time again is something that we call the Pareto principle, which is that, oftentimes 20% of your customers account for 80% of the profitability
Right.
and then the flip. So you want to make these intentional decisions with your cash and your capital, and not just relegate that to sort of after the fact kind of thinking.
Well, and I know that there's a lot of people that have this fear of taking on debt, right? And they would prefer to use their cash rather than to go put it on a credit card or pay the credit card off immediately with the cash. And they got a 30-day window on it versus utilizing the ability of capital so that you still have cash on hand for those important opportunities. I'm not saying, taking on debt is a good thing, but taking on debt may be a better thing sometimes than cash. Is that still true in your space?
Well, yes and no, right? So
Great answer.
let's use the pandemic as a great example. When that hit, all heck broke loose, right? We had supply chains that were disrupted. I think each of us in our own personal lives became supply chain experts when we couldn't get toilet paper. But and we spent a lot more on transportation costs and other things. Well, so in response to that, the markets really kind of created a situation where we had free cost of capital, right? And so we got into this period, and I see this with big companies and small companies. We got into this period where we just assumed that the cost of debt was nothing and that cash was free.
Right.
And so then we took on a bunch of debt, but you still have to service that debt. And that also limits how much more you can do. There's only a certain amount that you can actually take on relative to your revenue and your profitability. But now we're in an environment where the cost of debt is back up. And if you've been following the Fed, it's probably not going down anytime soon because inflation
Mm.
keeps going up. So that sort of variable or that equation of, should you take on debt is a nuanced one, right? It really has to do with how much leverage do you already have? How expensive is that debt? And yeah,
What's the repayment
it always
terms?
does. Yeah, you're always going to factor that into your equation. But what I'm trying to spread the gospel on is, the cash that you're going to generate from your internal operations. And let's just use a manufacturing example. We could apply it to services as well. But if you think about it, if you're in a business that's selling something, you're going it's the time that you put cash out to buy something, and then you make something, and then you sell it, and then you collect that cash, right? It's that cycle, and you want that cycle to be as fast as possible, because
Mhm.
as that then starts to churn off cash, that actually churns off capital for your business, and that's what creates wealth, and that's what gives you the opportunity then to go reinvest, to do expand, all those great things. That cash that you're going to generate just from your own operations is not it's both the cheapest form of cash and capital that you're going to find access to. It also is a great barometer for the health of your business.
Mm.
And we talk about profitable businesses can go bankrupt. So it will really point out where you have process failures and where you may be also spending too much money on certain aspects like collections or like getting bills out or the like.
No, that's really that's and see that's why I wanted to bring you on today is because there's so many different nuances that we need to look at. And most business owners, at least in the smaller space, the under 10 million space, they often are, tied up doing this, looking at how do I get my company to produce more and where's the next customer and stop, put out that fire and put out that fire, where they're not looking at the nuances of accounting because A, they don't know how, or they don't like it, or it's very scary. And then they rely on an accounting team, part-time, full-time, in-house, out-of-house, to make recommendations to them that they may not be getting. So I
Yeah,
wanted to bring you on and really highlight the areas to say, look, business owners, there's lots of opportunities that cash allows, and we need to make sure we're thinking of it as an opportunity and making sure we're making good decisions with them.
that's right. And there are, listen, I've been accused of bringing dinner parties to a halt when I talk about what I do for a living because I love it. But I recognize that this isn't what, most people go into business because they're passionate about something else, right? They're not passionate about accounting or they're not passionate about managing these kind of things. And there are all these like terms that we throw out and metrics and measurements and all that sometimes we gloss over them. So
Yeah.
this is what I tried to tackle in the book with humor is kind of understanding some of these seemingly boring concepts, but man, they're important to understand. I'll give you one example is when you talk about, again, a manufacturing environment, you'll often hear a term called absorption accounting. And this is a concept of, if you've got an asset, you've got a machine, you can take the cost of that machine essentially and spread it out over the things that you're making with that machine. You could take that cost and then divide that over the output, over the inventory. And that has an effect of making your profitability look better, but if you do that too much, if you're producing too much that way, you end up with too much inventory. And so that can then encumber your cash. And so it's going into some of these somewhat seemingly dry concepts and getting a good understanding because it's as a business owner, it's critical that you at least consider these concepts. Whether they're exciting or not, they're gonna impact your business.
And they're going to impact it in one of three ways, whether it's the value, the profitability, or the cash that you have in the company for those opportunities and things that you want to do with it. Um, that's why this is so important. So when we look at this, if we were to say to business owners in the smaller space and say to them, how do you do it? This is a little overwhelming. This is a little like, ooh, I don't want to do that because I'm running a chiropractic office, or I'm a plumbing company and I got 6 trucks. How do they get into this? How do they figure this out?
Yeah, it's fun, right? Because at one level, it seems so incredibly straightforward and simple. You
For
know,
some of us.
get well, or just if you take it at the highest level, get people to pay you faster, pay people slower, don't hold as much inventory. End of story. No need to buy a book. You're done. Um, but it's the trick of how do you actually do that given the business that you're in. And so, yeah, so you're right. So what I've done is I've tried to outline all of the different stages of managing, and I start off with trade working capital, which is your receivables, payables, and inventory. And then I get into things like, what if you have logistics or what if you have production? And then I get into things like, what kind of metrics and incentives should you consider? Here's a
Mm.
here's a freebie or a good one here. If you're paying commissions to your salespeople on revenue, you might want to consider paying them on collected revenue, right?
Ah,
Because yeah, then you start to get them involved in that, negotiation up front about what my terms are going to be. And they've got a vested stake in making sure, that they're getting back to the customers if for some reason they're slow paying. So it's just stuff like that. So I try and break down, to your point of like, how do you get started? So each chapter kind of goes through a scenario, and then I have some best practices that you can follow as well.
Good. So it's one of those easier read books because they're telling you stories of things that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that, right? And we know that many of today's counting people are fantastic at looking backwards and saying these are the direct, this is what you should have done, or this is how we can do it. But finding those people that can say, hey, here's an idea. Have you thought about this process? And it's a financial process in your business that you didn't think about before because you're busy swinging the hammer. And I think that's the partnerships that I love having books like yours that come to market that really educate the business owner to go, oh, I didn't think about that because they didn't think about it until someone brought it to their attention.
Yeah, and if misery loves company, I spend my time working with very, very big, very well-known companies. And for them, the issue is they've got all these people spread throughout the organization that are making all these decisions. And the people at the top don't really even know who's making all these decisions that are tying up, that could be encumbering cash. So if misery loves company, even the big guys are doing this. But I'll tell you what, I co-authored a study, and you can access that on my website. We'll give you that information as well. But where we looked at, I think it was 1,000 companies globally, and we analyzed those that perform better in the top quartile of cash performance. And what we've got empirical evidence to show that when there is a downturn, those companies are less susceptible to it. They come
Oh,
out
of
of the
course.
downturn faster. They don't go nearly far down as the others. And there could be differentials on profit and revenue between them, but it's the cash element that's the difference maker, right? And so that's if there's any takeaway from this discussion today, it's that cash is the lifeblood of a business, and because it's that's what you can actually invest, buy stuff with, pay people with, not the promised revenue or not the inventory that's sitting on the shelf. Even though it has value, you still have to sell that and liquidate that at some point.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that having that three-legged stool, as you said in the beginning, to really focus on the three areas of it adds so much more to the company. And when we talk about opportunities, listeners, we're talking about maybe it's an opportunity to grab inventory at a lower price or products to build at a lower price. Maybe you can make that investment in new equipment, or maybe you can make that investment in a new market or strategy or hiring a better person, or invest in the people that you have, keep great people. It's all that movability that when you're strapped or you're thinking, here's promised revenue or here's product that I haven't sold yet, it just doesn't give you any wiggle room that you really want to have. And
That's
I
right.
think, having that flexibility and being agile and nimble in business creates so much more security, safety, comfort, calmness, no rough tossing and turning at night when you know you have something in the checking account to make decisions with.
Right. And so while we've largely been talking about scenarios where somebody's making products, right?
Mhm.
And admittedly, that's the fictitious company I created in there makes products. But then I do spend the last chapter talking about how this could apply to services business, professional services businesses. You brought up healthcare. I mean, my goodness, that so the process around getting paid or the claims submission process is often referred to as revenue cycle management. And so I kind of try, you could write volumes on that concept alone, but I try and break that down and talk about, what the payers are going to require, admissions process if you're a doctor, things that you might want to consider doing on the front end. So there are kind of practical tips here for services businesses, professional businesses as well, that's not just a manufacturing company.
Oh, 100%. Just because you're selling a product or a service, there's still levers that you can pull to make these arrangements come out. If you're selling products, you've got a cost of goods sold that are more impactful than the service, but it's still in services, you still have a cost of goods sold. They're just not as high on the P&L and the balance sheet as the other company, but there's still so many levers that you can pull if you're aware of them.
That's right. And if you are, if you're a professional services, like, lawyers, accountants, consultants, oftentimes, and again, disclaimer here, I'm not an accountant, but oftentimes you will set up something called, cash accounting versus accrual accounting.
Mm-hmm.
So that means you're paying your taxes you're paying out based on the cash that you have in hand. If that's the case, then it's even more important for you to focus on cash, because that's the cash that you actually have versus, being able to leverage accrued revenue if you're going to go out and borrow or something along those lines. That's the cash that actually gets redistributed to the principals.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about that. We talk about how it impacts, professional services as well as those that are, making and selling stuff.
Awesome. Well, Peter, you said cash is king, right? in the title of your book, and I believe it 1,000%. Where can listeners find out more about you and the book and the ideas that you share?
I love that you asked me that. Thank you. PeterKingma.com is my website, and you can download the introduction to the book. You can also, I post all of the other things, different things I've written, different podcast interviews and the like. So there's more content there that you can access as well. And then the book is available, everywhere, Barnes and Noble, Target, Amazon, all that sort of thing.
Love it. Love it. And it's a fantastic title. So kudos to you on that one. But
Thank
I
you.
think listeners, we're not gonna drink from a fire hose and become an accounting expert on business. But if you can get one new idea and implement it into your business, those little incremental changes can make so much more for your company than you ever imagined. So my philosophy is like incremental changes and big results, right? And so don't think that this is going to be this over, you're going to sleep overnights and you're going to have all these challenges and then you're going to turn your company upside down. It's just the little itty bitty things. But making those changes can improve your company value, the cash that's flowing through, the opportunities you can have, the value of the company, the relationships with your customers. I mean, I can go on for days about the benefits that having proper cash flow in your company can do for you. So I encourage you, go get the book, read it, grab an idea today, grab another idea next month or next quarter, and just start implementing. I know that you'll look at it in the rearview mirror and go, wow, that was the best investment of my time. All right. Thanks for listening. I hope you found a couple ideas to put into your business that will help you become more profitable. As I mentioned before, if you want to supercharge your business, go ahead and download my new Profit Booster Playbook, packed with 3 strategies and the actionable steps that you can use to make this your most profitable year ever. And go grab it for free at boostingprofit.com. And Peter and I would love to hear your questions. Tell us what idea you want to do, or maybe what challenge you have. Just tell us in the comments what it is that you've taken away from our story and what kind of idea you're going to implement. We would love to comment back on it and maybe direct you in the right path. While you're at it, please subscribe. And you want to catch Profit with a Plan on any of your favorite podcast players, we're looking forward to more great profitable information on next week's show. So until then, make your plans and profit with them. Thanks so much, Peter.
Thanks, Marcia. Great to be with you.